So we are faced with the issue of what do we teach how? And as people begin to think through these ideas and ask themselves, looking at the models of meaning making, people like Collins, Brown and Larkin's work involving the progressive refinement model and concepts of schema activation and access, they began to sort of rethink what it is that we should be doing in our schools and how we conceptualize the sort of the piecemeal skills approach that we tended to approach. And we shifted to talking about strategies, which was more clusters of skills that people would select from and bring to bear as they were building their meanings, doing their meaning making. And the types of things that began to sort of fall into place in these clusters, in this sort of project of reading, were things that were reader-based, the ability to select and judge sources, sample material, and particularly these days in the digital realm, we're doing that constantly. Indeed, as we began to sort of think about, let's start to rethink our reading programs that they fit with how we actually deal with our worlds, the type of planning we do, the types of selection of materials. It was a little bit different from this sort of one story at a time to actually beginning to pull together a workbench of materials and thinking about the internet and hard copy type sources that people might access as they're engaged in a topic. And how we, as we're looking through things like the internet, how we're oftentimes glancing and checking out things, asking ourselves questions, just en route to picking what might be the ideas that we might actually be pulling together. And so you can sort of see how these reader-based things begin to sort of play out. Selecting and judging sources, questioning, getting students to ask their own questions, which would change in accordance with where they were in this project of reading or where they were with a particular selection. Oftentimes, you'll start out reading something or other if you're involved in a project. What's this about? Is this relevant? How has this person explored these ideas? And then as you dig deeper, you'll ask different sorts of questions. And so looking for questioning practices from students that fitted with the projects that they were pursuing. Helping students connect ideas, which might involve things like what I'm doing, is how does one begin to lay out ideas so that they fit together in a way that helps one develop a coherent and logical understanding, even though one might find themselves in the end sort of realizing that there are gaps in their understanding that they need to pursue or realize might need to be resolved at another time. And also using visualization. If you recall the John Bransford and Johnston experiment that used the power of that image to sort of serve as a schema. Well, when one visualizes or one actually gets involved in the scene of a story or a historical event, the power of that is that in a sense forces one to pull together ideas in a coherent fashion. Coherent in terms of the relationship physically, but also temporally to oneself. And also recognizing that reading involves something akin to what writers do. When one reads, one can cross-check, or one can revise or rethink. And encouraging people to, and particularly if they're using the internet, is to perhaps check with more than one source. In terms of things, or as they're going, if they're for example, if they're doing struggling with some concept, that they might sort of check it elsewhere as a way of helping them sort of deal with something as they go. I find these reader-based strategies to be really key And I find myself, as I deal with people in projects, wanting to almost have these as almost like a pull-down menu that encourages kids to move forward. The text-based suggestions have started to come out. However, I find a little bit a little bit away from what I think is ideal, and let me explain. As people contemplated text-based strategies, they thought, well, maybe we can get students to basically diagram the text, how the text might be made up of a narrative where this event leads to this event, or where there might be a setting, a plot, and things like that, where they sort of diagram the ideas and their relationship to each other. Or they outline it, or they create a network which fits with the text. Where I find myself frustrated from this is I don't really want to do this with somebody else's text. I want to use this technique with my own ideas. And what I find tiring is to be forced to do this for somebody else's text, unless I'm really wanting to interrogate it. And I actually don't feel like I'm, as a reader, I'm like a policeman investigating some sort of somebody's testimony or something like that. Although at times I might want to do that sort of close reading, and if I want to do that close reading, I might use those sorts of text-based strategies. So these first were the ones that unfolded in the context of learning to learn. I'll also introduce another term here that I like, that Marie Clay uses. She talks about self-improving systems. And I like that concept because it fits better with what I'm talking about here. So these were the first types of things that came forward. But as these things have expanded, and we realize more and more, and certainly through the 80s and 90s as we began to make also a social term, we recognize that a set of skills and strategies have to do with a person's ability to work with others. And that one is involved in what Jenkins has talked about in a form of participatory engagement with ideas. And participation is might be actually doing things in partnership, but also might be doing things with people to whom you might give advice or take advice, from who you might procure feedback, the various and sundry ways by which one engages with others. And it might be that everybody's working on different strands of the same project. Maybe they come together like a different parts of a whole. Or maybe they're different ways of crisscrossing a topic, and enable you to compare and sort of see how people are experiencing differently. But we realize that, you know, part of the strategy development we need to do is to help students, in a sense, confer, network, and work with others. Indeed, and the other key element, this monitoring, is it's related to collaboration, and because it also involves working with oneself. And this whole concept of self-improving systems, learning to learn, has an integral part of it is what you're wanting students to do, or readers to do, is to assess themselves, assess the task, assess the material that they're going to be reading or working through or on, to assess plans, to initiate plans, to monitor those plans. That an integral part of the strategies has to do with assessment. But instead of somebody assessing you, the whole goal here is to help somebody assess themselves. And that indeed, that this orientation to assessment should pervade. And that what we should be asking ourselves in our programs is, what are we doing in our program relative to assessment that focuses upon helping students assess themselves, helping students develop criteria for judging what they might do, how they might proceed, what it is that they've done, and how they might shift it. And so all of a sudden we started to sort of see a very different sort of orientation in terms of our reading programs to one that was truly tied to student empowerment, which befitting the sort of work that the comments I've made about teachers. Now the interesting question is so we're trying to mobilize students to do this. How do we get them to do it? And it's been interesting to sort of look at the ways that we as educators have approached it. A term that we oftentimes use to describe what teachers might do is scaffolding. How might teachers scaffold what it is that they do to introduce, engage students with these sort of strategies, and moreover develop them to the point to which they use them flexibly and adaptably.